Were you guys
Sure.
stuck out there in the lobby with me?
No, I was back to back, so I just coming from another call.
Oh, you're totally fine, Chris. We were, I think we had some functionality where we were all in the lobby and we needed Anna or Gurjeet to let us in. So Gurjeet was great, and she was able to hop in and let us in. So we'll see if we can get Stephen and Whitney in as we go. Let me see if I can share screen just so that we're all okay. I am a Zoom user. Okay, I am not a Teams user, so bear with me now if this doesn't work. Can you all see this?
I can see it.
Okay, perfecto.
Yep.
So what I did in prep for this call, and it's so far it's just, okay, great. Here's Whitney coming in. Whitney, how are you?
I'm doing all right, guys. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you so much for joining. Perfect timing. We're just launching in now.
Okay.
And what I have done, guys, is I've put up on the screen, this is a copy of the March 2023 markup that we submitted over to Ginny. So this is what she was reacting to. This is in track changes for ease of our further editing. What I did, just so that we can sort of look at the comments and then toggle to the portions of the draft that implicates it, is I've put Ginny's issues list in this comment bubble over in the corner. Can you all see that okay?
Yes, I can see
Yep.
it.
Okay. All right. And let's maybe just kind of roll through them from a high level perspective, and then we can, yeah, Chris, go ahead.
Can I ask one quick overarching question, not to consume time?
Of course.
What is our goal with respect to our interactions with the county attorney's office at this point?
I think, Chris, it's to identify
Can you
what
just give a little bit more
Yeah, sure.
context on that question? I am deeply appreciative of how much work we are all putting in on this. And when I say we, I mean really you all and Helen in particular. I'm a little tired of the back and forth on this. And I've been a huge advocate for, I'm almost at the point where I don't necessarily care if the county attorney's office agrees with us or not on these matters. I want to send a version up to the board and let them fight with the county attorney's office, or make a public declaration that they're simply not going to accept our requests and have them justify it. So I'm just mindful that I'm pretty sure the first draft of this could have gone up, that y'all came up with like 2 years ago, could have gone to the board. But I feel like and maybe it's not a some nefarious plot here, I don't know, but I just feel like we have done a tremendous amount of work that perhaps should have been on the board and the county attorney's office at this point, if they take our recommendations around updating the ordinance seriously. So I'm just want to be mindful of like how much more of this do we really think is on us, as much as it is that it feels like death by 1,000 cuts of edits from their office. I'm saying this with a deep appreciation for Jenny, but I just feel like, aren't we at the point maybe where we just say, here are the disagreements between us and the county attorney's office, and as the legislature of this county, you all should make a decision, and if you don't want to pass it, you should publicly be accountable for why you don't. So sorry, I just wanted to say that up front, and I don't mean to derail the whole meeting, but maybe I'm alone in this, but I'm just wondering if perhaps, like, what are we trying to get them to agree with us at this point, or are we just trying to make sure the differences are really sharp so the board understands them? Because I kind of feel like what's happening is exactly what the county attorney's office wants to happen, which is we're like years into this process, and I don't want to spend 2 more years working on this, and really y'all have done the work. So I'm I'll shut up. But sorry, Roland.
No, Chris, listen, I think totally fair point and well taken, and I don't disagree at all. I would parse it some, okay? And for the benefit of the folks on this call, I think there has been, other than you, Roland, and I thank you so much for being our sort of anchor of continuity through this process, we've had a lot of different cooks in the kitchen on this exercise, okay? And my goal as I think about this is to eliminate the daylight between county attorney's office and what we're doing. And in fairness to what county attorney has done. I think in a lot of respects on prior iterations of their draft, they actually identified some pretty fair edits that needed revision and refinement from the drafting committee. And I attribute a lot of that to a lot of different people were working on it. There were some version control issues at the outset, and they are actually identifying kinks in this document that really could be ironed out well. And I am very encouraged. I mean, Chris, if you saw the markup from a year ago and the magnitude of brain damage it took for me to version control it and sort out what was modified against what document and when, the fact that we have 7 points that we have to talk about, some of which are conceptual and fair items, shows me material progress. Now, I think at the end of the day, we are probably going to get to 2, maybe 3 areas with philosophical disagreement, and that's fine. But I think our lobbying effort to the board is going to be cleaner, crisper, and easier if it's all the other jazz that's just sort of addressed and come to the wayside. So my agenda for purposes of this call was to quickly convene as a group and talk about the 7 items on the list, figure out what our position is as a group, and then figure out the best way that we can market. And frankly, I'm happy. And Stephen, I can't, because I'm sharing screen. I can't see if Stephen is on yet. Is he? Guys who can see the participant list. I'm hopeful that Stephen will be willing to continue to work with me because he has also been a laboring oar on the draft on any implementation that we need to make. And there are a few pieces where I think we're going to need his help. So unless, and forgive me, if you guys can just call off mute if you have questions, because I'm sharing screen, I can't really see you. So if I'm barreling over you, it's not intentional. So just stop me if there's any preliminaries before we launch. Okay. All right. Look, definition of county workforce, I think, and Roland, look to you for any kind of historical drafting committee insight on this, because I think this predates me. But the idea was, let's broaden it up, right? And let's extend, like many other jurisdictions do, at least the employment related protections of this ordinance, not to just employees, but to also those people who are contractors who may be misclassified or what have you. And so I think the spirit of the edit was to extend the definition of county workforce, which lives down here, to contractors as well as employees. And Ginny makes this point about, well, we actually have who constitutes a contractor defined with precision, and our language is anyone who receives a benefit, which I kind of agree with Ginny. It is a little bit amorphous. And if there is a way in which we can actually connect it to people who are workers who could be misclassified workers, I think that's a fine edit that might get this a little bit tighter. But Roland, do you have any insight on the genesis of this edit to begin with?
Yeah, it really was. It all started out as a very, very simple effort in order to bring the local ordinance in compliance with the state ordinance, because the state statute, because the Democratic legislature had expanded rights under the human rights statute, which we did not have in our local ordinance. So what started out as an effort to just bring the local ordinance in compliance with the state ordinance resulted in something that was far bigger, because there were certain members of the commission at that time, and a couple of them are still on the commission, who took the position, well, if we're going to send something up to the board in which we're going to propose changes, then there are all these other things in the ordinance which are very, very old, and maybe we should send those forward as well. We should do it all pretty much at one time, instead of doing it, one item this year, one item next year, et cetera, et cetera. So that led to this big project to do it pretty much this way. I agree with you and Chris that this is taking longer, but at the same time, I think working with the county attorney's office, surprisingly, I think is going to speed this up once we get the whole thing to them, because then they can't really sort of rely on the fact that, oh, this is our first time looking at this. We're going to have to do a review of it. We have been working directly with the attorney whose job it is to review this and to make the recommendation to the county board. we have been working with that attorney. Now, grant you, it really has taken too long, but it's to our benefit when it is officially there. But I take the position that it's officially there, and it was sent there in 2020. But now what we're doing is we're working, as I look at it, we're working with the county attorney on helping them, I guess, prepare whatever they're going to prepare for the county board, because I don't think we're going to be part of the recommendation that goes to the board. My past experience from working with efforts to amend the statute is it really comes as a recommendation from staff. We may, if recommendation from staff doesn't agree with us, I think we should request the opportunity to speak to the county board on what's before them. But if we keep working with the county attorney, and we're doing it now, hopefully that's going to minimize what's going to be the sort of discrepancy. And that may be the 7 that Helen is talking about. And we may be able to sort of dwindle that down to just 1 or 2. And then it makes it a very, very smooth process, I think, once it goes up there to the board. We don't want them to look at this and say, oh my God, look at all of these changes you're doing. I'm scared about making all these things. But if one can say, hey, we sat down with your attorney and there was a back and forth from us, and this is the finished product that we all agree on, this one. But by the way, there are some other things that we agree on that we want in there as well. So I think this is a good thing that we're doing. It's a shame it's taken too long, but I think what we ought to just decide that right now is this is going to be our final effort at it, and we're just going to send it up after this, no matter what, what it looks like. So
Yeah,
sorry
agreed.
to talk too long.
No, super helpful, Roland. And I think there's alignment there totally. I guess the question for you is, when we wanted to include the definition of Arlington County workforce to pick up contractors, am I right that the original drafting committee was very focused on picking up those service providers and those workers who could be equivalent to misclassified workers? We weren't talking about really anybody who receives any benefit whatsoever from a taxpayer funded revenue in exchange for services, right?
I think so.
Okay. And that being the case, I actually think that Ginny's edit here in point 1 that you can see over here in the margin, where she's referencing, certain contractors that have contracts worth over 10K as defined in this other area of the Virginia code, might be a nice way to define what contractors are we contending are covered by the scope of this ordinance. And I would think it would be individual contractors, not entities. Do you all agree with that approach? It's here, if you can all see here. So this is the comment I'm talking about here from Ginny. So Ginny's first point was the definition of county workforce. Our proposal included language, which is here in blue in the markup, that anyone that receives a benefit from the county is a contractor as defined in the definition of Arlington County workforce. And therefore, all of those references to the Arlington County workforce would pick up those episodic contractors. And I think what Ginny is saying, do we want to actually put some precision around which contractors would be covered? So individuals that meet the definition of this Virginia code 2.2 4311. Do you guys agree with that?
I mean, I think that would make it easier to pass.
Yeah.
If it's already in conjunction with what we have.
And I'm fine with that as well, because I'm currently prioritizing completion over winning out an argument. But the county transacts a significant amount of its operational business through nonprofits that I can double check the Virginia Code statute that I would want to make sure are inclusive of the Virginia Code statute. For example, AHC, most of the county's housing, most of the county's affordable housing units are managed by nonprofits under contract with the county. And I would assume that we would want their behavior to be regulated by the ordinance in the way that we've made changes. So I think as long, and it's often the case that organizations that receive grants or have contracts for fall into the category of contractors. So I'm fine with adding more precision, but I do think it's important to note that the county uses contractors to transact significant business. And so things like AHC or other housing providers that make sure like nonprofits aren't exempt from that code provision, because that would be problematic if we were wanting to ensure that they're included in that workforce. And that's ultimately what concerned me, is that when a government significantly uses contractors to achieve its policy ends, that sometimes insulates those contractors from responsibility. And I would just hate for us to be doing that now, or for us to continue that. So I define myself by looking again at the Virginia Code statute that's referenced. And again, in the interest of wanting to get this getting us through this, I'm happy with more precision, but I did want to highlight just why I think personally I thought that the addition of the contractor or the receives payer benefit was useful, so that the county couldn't leverage a highly technical definition to insulate certain contractors or our benefits providers from scrutiny. So.
And my thinking on that, Chris, I completely agree with you, right? My thinking on this under the construct of this ordinance is that actually those contractors that are themselves employing workers, nonprofits in Arlington, and are providing services to the county are going to be separately covered by the purview of this ordinance because they are employers, right?
Yeah.
Right. So,
yeah.
So those, let's say those discriminated against employees have recourse both against their direct employer, the nonprofit, potentially against the county under theories of joint and several liability or joint employer liability. And then, arguably, they may be able to take the position that they are individually also constituted as part of the Arlington County workforce.
Yeah, and I think I was more concerned with a resident, in the same way that our our recommendation to expand education as in the jurisdiction of the statute, the ordinance was intended to ensure that parents have the ability to file claims, not just employers of the school district. So my concern was less employees, but more of residents. But at the same time, there are obviously residential protections throughout the ordinance that definitely apply. So that's why I'm not going to die on the hill, but I'm just nor do I need to die on the hill, to be clear. Like, I think that the specific example of like how residents in an AHC facility can file independently under the housing protections, but I'm just mindful of any future I don't know if there's a scenario by which a county resident might be impacted by how services are delivered, but might not be covered by the ordinance because they're not an employee. But that might be a very small Venn diagram of situations. And so I'm comfortable with whatever you all decide in terms of following an existing definition.
Yeah, and Chris, I'd ask, can you, after this call as sort of a takeaway, just take a spin through to see if the concern that you're identifying still exists? Because my understanding of the construct of these definitions is all of those individuals, either as a resident or as an employee of an Arlington-based nonprofit, would have recourse under this ordinance irrespective of this edit. But if you see that there is some subset for which there isn't protection, then I agree with you. We should close that loophole over. I'm not sure that would that we would leave those people without recourse, given that they have other angles to the protections of the ordinance. But so pending, Chris, if you see anything that I'm not seeing, I think what we've reached consensus is to accept Ginny's threshold of what material contractors we're talking about, and that we would limit the definition of contractors to individual contractors that meet that definition. Do we agree? Okay, great. So that's point number one. Point number two, Whitney, would love for your eyes on this one. I think certainly, and Chris, you've just said it, right? The intent of the edit that we made in picking up schools when we did in the last markup that went up to the board in May was to provide both the employees of schools with employment related recourse under this ordinance, but to also open this ordinance up to provide students and parents with a pathway to raise their concern and their complaint, right? That's our intent. But the fact that Ginny raised the question that there was an ambiguity on that to her, is it debatable, is exactly what I'm worried about and what Chris was just saying, right? Could there be a world in which somebody makes a future argument to say, well, in including schools in the definitions here, the way in which you've done it is to really only provide recourse under the statute for people employed by one of the Arlington County schools, which is necessarily more limited than we need to. So I guess my request for you, Whitney, is can you take a look at this, and I'll send this document around to this group in Word again. Can you take a look at this and see if there's anything further we might want to clarify in this markup to make clear that we are in fact talking about student and or parent complaints and not just employment related claims as it pertains to schools?
Yeah, absolutely. What's actually very interesting is I just had a talk with the superintendent, and he actually, as a person who was on the Human Rights Commission and helped draft the language for the in Arlington Human Rights Commission to include schools, he doesn't remember exactly how it's worded, but he felt as though employment actually wouldn't or shouldn't or couldn't be covered based on the new oh my God, Winnie, it's been a long day. What do you call it? The contract with the teachers and the union. So
Yeah, the collective bargaining agreement.
thank you. Oh my gosh, yes. So he was under the impression that it had to it could not include employment, and so really it was from that conversation solely for parents and students and not employees and staff members.
So that's interesting, right? I mean, I get that point as it relates to the union employees, right? Those employees of schools who are covered by the CBA, they have grievance procedures under their CBA to raise their concerns. That makes perfect sense. But of course, there's going to be a whole basket of managers and administrators and people who are not eligible to be union covered, who should have employment related recourse through this ordinance, right? If you have a Black teacher who is discriminated against by her supervisor and she's non-union, she should have the ability, if she so chooses, to bring a claim under this ordinance if she doesn't want to go to the EEOC. But I really think it should cover both. So that's really interesting. Could you, Whitney, when you take a spin through, can you look at both sides of the coin, right? Make sure there's no ambiguity that, of course, it pertains to education. Parents and students have recourse, but likewise, eligible teachers, right, non-union covered teachers have the ability to bring employment related claims under this ordinance if they so choose.
I love that. Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. All right, so that's point number 2. And I think probably nothing to do there unless, Whitney, you say there's ambiguity, let's tighten it, because actually she's daylighting an issue for us that we might want to fix. And hopefully nothing to do there by way of a markup. Point number 3, guys, can you see, is Stephen on the line? Okay. Point number 3, I'm not sure, and if you can all see this, point number 3 is she says that some of the edits that we made to the source of income additions go beyond the intent of what the code is. So I don't know if she's sort of laying an Easter egg here on Dylan's rule issues, but I suspect what this is we have some sections in here on commercial real estate, and how the source of funds protection extends to commercial real estate. And, notionally, I obviously I want our ordinance to be as broad and as protective as it possibly can be. Stephen and I had a number of conversations on this one. Notionally, I struggled with this one a little bit. Here it is, commercial real estate. I struggled with this one a little bit of having source of funds or source of income exist as a protected attribute in the commercial real estate context, because the very nature of that business, of course, is to look at whether or not, some sort of investment partner is investment worthy. And as part of any ordinary diligence in a commercial real estate deal, you're looking at somebody's, financing, somebody's debt picture and the like. That's part of the business of doing that. And I suspect, so here I have that language, right? So here is discrimination in the commercial real estate context, and we're saying you can't discriminate on the basis of source of funds. I think what I've just highlighted for you on the screen is what Ginny is referencing, and I'll go back up to her comment. So the question for this group, so here's her comment 3. Some of the source of income additions seem to go beyond the intent of the amendment. For those who engage in this area for business. This is why I think she's talking about commercial real estate. Ginny wants to know if we have an objection to kind of bringing it back to what the Virginia code provides. So I think that would be deleting source of funds in that commercial real estate context. I have to say to this group, I am agnostic on that one. I actually, in commercial real estate context, I see the argument. I see the other side of the argument. That said, I'm not overly agitated about kicking it up and seeing what the county attorney has to do. But what is this group? What do you all think about that?
I don't have a strong view on this. Roland, I think you are talking, but you are muted.
Thank you for telling me that. I don't have no, I'm really not wedded to that because source of income was mainly meant to deal with housing, but at the same time, could there possibly ever be an instance in which it was, source of income would be pertinent in that particular area? So I'm all for kicking it up with it in there and then let them kick it out if they want to.
Yeah, because you're right, Roland. I mean, okay, let's say you have, I don't know, some real estate investment trust comprised of investors who have taken government subsidies or grants in the past, and they've combined and they've come up with some investment vehicle, right? And a commercial real estate, I don't know, a VC or a private equity firm is like, I don't want to work with these guys. They have government subsidies, right? You're right. I suppose that could be a proxy for discrimination. So you're right. Why don't we just keep it in? So we'll respond to Whitney. Yes, we do object to pairing it back to what's in the code. We think this is an important protection.
Very good.
Okay. All right, good. All right, point number 4. Here's my suggestion. So we took some of the harassment language from other very progressive jurisdictions. So I think San Francisco or San Diego, one of the big cities in California, has a very nice, robust section in its ordinance on anti-harassment protection, and it gets very robust and detailed. And that's what we cribbed from for purposes of this. And she wants to, and I think that the California template is based upon sexual harassment examples. And she's saying, are you guys open to us building these examples out to put some of this harassment on the basis of disability, race, nationality? Fine with me. If they want to pick up the pen and build out the work that we have done, I think that's appropriate. Anybody have an objection here?
No objection from me.
No,
I think that would be a great idea if they build on it.
Yep, no objection either.
Okay, good. And then in that California template, again, there is a reference to private information in the harassment section. I think it's something like harassment can be, deliberately disclosing somebody's private information in a way that's creating an abusive or hostile work environment. I don't have any concern with Ginny defining what sort of information would be private, right? Could be personnel information, could be personal, financial or medical or, familial information and the like. So if she wants to pick up the pen and expand upon that, I think that's fine. Anybody have a concern with that?
No. So Helen, really what she is looking at doing is expanding the section that we have that we're proposing on harassment, because it's a pretty big section that we are proposing. So does she want to expand that?
I think,
by
and
the way,
I'm
that's H, which is 31-13.
Can you tell me what page it is, Roland, so I can
Yeah.
scroll to?
Yeah, I think it's 31-13. It's 13, page 13.
Okay. All right. I'm getting there. Okay. Here it is. I think when you look at some of these examples here,
Okay.
Where I've highlighted on the screen, I think that some of these subsections are very clear that they are related to gender-based items. And so I think she was suggesting finding a way to weave in more broadly that these examples can pertain to somebody's race, religion, national origin. Obviously, some of these things, sexual gestures and touching and pinching and the like, might be more pertinent to sexual harassment, but they can be germane to other protected attributes as well.
Very good. Okay. Good. Thanks.
Yep. Okay. So, all right. I think we're all good on, go ahead, Ginny, have fun with harassment, expand it as you will. It's all consistent with what we're doing. And if she's happy to take the pen on that, I'm happy. All right. Point number 6, and this might be something that I take offline with Stephen. There are a number of places kind of peppered throughout here. And Roland, you might have insight on this, and let me see if I can't put my finger on it. There are a couple of places where we've said things. Yeah, here it is, folks. Can you all see this on the screen? So it's beneath harassment. Okay, it's B and C. Okay, so A of this section is you can't engage in unlawful harassment, and we have that big definition of harassment. B of this section is you can't violate Virginia code as it relates to state grants and programs. You can't, and then C is you can't violate the Virginia code as it pertains to voting. I got to be honest, I'm a little bit of the point of view that, like, does it hurt to call out what you can't otherwise do under the Virginia code? No, it doesn't hurt, but what does it actually get us, right? And I guess we're saying, like, don't engage in discrimination, harassment, or retaliation in these contexts either. But it is a little bit confusing that we just have these B and C's in here. And I think that's what Ginny is focused on. So Roland, any insight on the genesis of these or why we wanted to do these?
Yeah, I think the member who proposed that is not here to speak to that, but I too am sort of questioning in the area of voting exactly what we would actually do. Would the voting be, because I'm totally unfamiliar with the state statutes that are quoted here, so I don't know what what these two things entail.
Yeah, I think these are statutes that would say things like it's unlawful in the Commonwealth of Virginia to deny voting access to a person on the basis of a protected attribute that they possess, right? Race, national origin, disability status, etc. Right? So I think that's what that 544 says in spirit, right? More nuance to it. But you can't discriminate in the context of voting, nor can you discriminate within the Commonwealth of Virginia in doling out state grants or programs on the basis of a protected attribute, race, religion, nationality, et cetera. But you're right. Who is prohibited from doing this? Like what?
Well, and I'm also thinking, what would be the enforcement mechanism? What would we do? And I must admit, I'm not knowledgeable about the jurisdiction of the Board of Elections, but that seems to me to be encroaching there. And I just question, whether that's something we really want to get into. Whitney, what do you think about that? You
Oh, wait, can you repeat? I was in motion.
Yeah, no, simply because your knowledge on human rights. The section that someone has proposed to add would make it unlawful to violate the Virginia Code dealing with voting.
Right.
So I guess my question is, wouldn't that be something for the Board of Elections or some other entity that deals directly with voting and with elections? And I don't know what could we possibly, how can we possibly remedy that or gain from that? Yeah, thank you. Gain from that.
You know what? I am, Kim Phillip is one of my employees and also the president of the Board of Elections.
Yeah.
So maybe let me ask her too. I mean, to Helen Ann's one point, like, it's not necessarily bad to spell out something that we don't want people to do, even though we don't have to.
Right.
But we also don't want to necessarily make this any harder than it has to be.
Right.
But I mean, I think we can all agree that we do not want people's rights violated while they're voting. But is our ordinance the best place to spell that out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the point. Is it the
Yeah.
best place to put it there?
Yeah.
And also with grants and programs, exactly what does that entail?
And Roland, I mean, I like the way Whitney just described it, right? I mean, Whitney, it's almost like it's a statement of policy. Like, you're right, Roland, like there's probably no enforcement teeth on this, right? Because I suppose if somehow, I don't know, I mean, I can't even come up with the hypothetical. You're an employer, you failed to permit your Black employees to take time out of their business day to go and exercise their legal right to vote. And that's happening along racial lines, right? Is there now the argument that the aggrieved employee can now bring a claim for direct discrimination in terms and conditions of employment, but then separately rely on Section C? My employer, impugned my ability to vote by denying my time off request in a way that was inconsistent to my comparator white employees? Maybe. I mean, maybe. Now, would they lean on the human rights ordinance for that? No, but it just provides a separate avenue of recourse outside of just the traditional discrimination prohibition above. So maybe it's worth, just like how we said before on the commercial real estate one, we could come up with one very extreme hypothetical where it may actually be pertinent and germane to a set of facts, but having the articulation of our commitment to this policy doesn't really hurt, right? Unless it's an encroachment, in which case the county attorney's office can tell us that. Some legal reason why we shouldn't do it.
Well, Helen, taking into consideration now the example that you posed, I think now we probably should mention something.
Yeah.
About that, because clearly that would be something I think that the commission could deal with. If it was a matter of discrimination on the job, then that clearly would come under our jurisdiction.
Yeah, it's arguably already covered under employment, but it's just an alternative path to address the same basket of unlawful conduct.
Yeah.
Stephen, I see that you have joined, and perfect timing. I'm not to put you on the spot, but we are. Stephen, can you hear us okay? I just want to make sure you're successfully in the lobby, and I can't see because I'm sharing screen.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So Stephen, just to catch you up quick, what we have done as a group is I have our latest copy of the big markup, right, that we did, not just the schools markup. I have that up on the screen. And then here in the comment bubble, I have Ginny's 7 points. So we've sort of talked through in some kind of where we're landing on these. And the genesis is, we'll take a spin through to just make sure that there'd be no unintended consequences on limiting the definition of contractors for point 1, right? So remember, Arlington County Workforce picks up contractors. We're going to make sure that we're very clear in our markup that when we include Arlington County Public Schools, we're doing that from an educational perspective. So parents and students have recourse under this ordinance, but so too do teachers if there is discrimination or harassment in the employment context in those employers within the county. We're going to hold firm on commercial real estate references to source of funds and source of income. Stephen, you and I have chatted about that a bit, but we've gotten consensus here from the rest of the group. Some of the edits that Ginny wants to make in actually expanding our language on harassment to make it more precise, it applies to other protected attributes. We're totally fine with that so long as she picks up the pen. And so here we are, we're on this conundrum. And Stephen, you and I have talked about this quite a bit. It's those 2 provisions, right? And I'll toggle to them in a second, but I just wanted you to see the comment that we're talking about. This is where Ginny is like, you guys have that section about it shall be unlawful in the context of voting to violate whatever, the Virginia Code section on voting, same thing, same language, almost in clone on state grants. And so as a commission, we've been sort of debating back and forth, like, is it really, like, are we really gaining anything in having those references there? Is it nice to have that policy statement? Are we encroaching on elections or some of the other state bodies in including that language? Whitney's going to talk to somebody she knows who's on the election commission. But, you know, you might have more insight, Stephen, on the genesis of those. And now I've just toggled through the provisions that I'm talking about here. Can you see that, Stephen, on the screen? B and C.
Mm-hmm. I don't remember the genesis of how they got in there, unfortunately, but I don't see a problem with it. I mean, is there some like Dillon rule issue? Is that what Jenny's issue is with this?
No, I think it was just kind of a head scratcher, as it was for all of us when we were knee deep in like, what are we solving for here? What are we doing here? Right. And I think where we've landed is like no downside. Of course, you can't engage in conduct and you know, these statutes reference like it's unlawful to discriminate when somebody exercising their right to vote on the basis of some sort of protected attribute, right?
Yeah.
Likewise, the Commonwealth of Virginia cannot discriminate in apportioning out state grants and programs on protected, you know, lines, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
That already exists up at the state level. What are we accomplishing here from an enforcement mechanism? And I think we crafted a hypothetical as we were noodling through this, that let's say you're a Virginia employer who has an inconsistent practice of approving leave for
Yeah.
your employees to vote, right?
Yeah,
So
I heard
you're
that.
okay. So we think that it probably can be an alternative path if you have that sort of fact pattern. So in that respect, why not? Let's just stand firm on it and let Ginny come up with a legal reason why we should take it out. Unless you see that differently.
No, I agree. I mean, there's huge chunks of this that is redundant with other laws, either state or federal.
Yeah.
They're there anyway, so who cares?
Yeah. Okay. Okay, got it. And then let's see where we are. Number 7. Oh, she's suggesting doing a definition on sex and age, which I actually thought we had in here, Stephen. Didn't we have age, or we had elderliness?
Yeah, I thought so.
Elderliness is defined. I guess gender is not defined. Gender identity is defined, but gender is not defined. And then I guess age is not defined, although that's pretty obvious. But if she's willing to pick up the pen on it, I'm totally agnostic. If she's going to do the work, I'm fine with it. Anybody disagree?
I don't really disagree, but I don't know what the difference is between gender and gender identity.
Potentially how you were born biologically and how you identify. Potentially. I don't know.
I think that's right. Because you have gender identity and gender expression are two different terms, and transgender refers to when the gender assigned at birth is different than your gender identity. So what is gender generally?
Right.
I mean, I'm sure we could find that language.
Yeah.
If we just remove identity from the defined term and just call it gender, I wonder if that will resolve the issue.
Can someone read the defined term? I'm driving now.
Yep. Gender identity means the gender-related identity, appearance, or other gender-related characteristics of an individual without regard to the individual's designated sex at birth or further defined by the laws of Virginia. I think that's a very precise definition of gender identity, the internalization of gender, which contrasts with gender expression, the outward. And so I really do think gender is not as narrow as that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's fun. We want to include gender too, but if we include the defined term as gender, then we also have to sort of like pop it in to all the other places that it has gender identity listed, which we can do.
Yeah. So wait, let's look at what we have in discrimination. Do we have gender? We have sex.
And do we know the difference between sex and gender?
Yeah. You know what? I'm looking at this and I'm seeing that like we picked up. Now, I get the gender identity edits came in 2020 before our markup, right? Roland, you might know that.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it's part of the statute.
So here's what's interesting, right? So look at 1A, A1A, Whitney, we're looking at housing, prohibited acts and housing. Gender identity is actually not called out. Am I not seeing it here? Yeah, gender identity is not called out as a protected basis in A1A. And that actually should have been picked up in the prior edit because it's everywhere else. So now I'm all of a sudden thinking, like, should we scrub this and make sure gender identity, gender and gender identity appear everywhere it needs to? All right, well, look, I mean, I think the answer on 7 is, are you guys fine with me going back to Whitney, excuse me, to Ginny and saying, yes, we're open to looking at definitions of age, sex, and gender if you want to propose them?
Sure.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, look, so here's what I'll do by way of next steps, because I know we only have 6 minutes left. Let me craft a draft response to Ginny. And I'd like for Ginny, if she's willing to do it, and some of the language of her issues list suggests that she is, I'd like to invite her to take the pen on some of the issues that we're open to. And this way we can react to her markup as opposed to us doing that work ourselves. The only gating issue I have on that, Chris, is just that one issue that you were going to take a spin through on the contractor side. And then Whitney, if you don't mind taking a spin through on the school side to make sure it's fulsome on both sides.
Well, if I'm going to your brother's senior awards, then we're going to your brother's senior awards.
Hey, Helen, I've been looking at. I'm pretty comfortable on that issue. I don't think I need to dig into it.
Okay, so we're okay
yeah.
saying yes to Ginny on that one.
Yes, let's
Okay.
just move it forward.
Okay, all right. That being the case, so then let me draft a responsive email. I'll run it by this committee. Make sure that you all agree. If you have any edits on the draft note to Ginny, please make them and send them to me directly. We can get this off to Ginny. Hopefully she'll then deliver a markup to us and we can review those asynchronously and then maybe just come together and just align in our thinking for another 20 minutes, half hour. And then off we go. Off it goes.
Good.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Sounds good. Good.
All right, guys, before we break, any other questions or comments on process? Chris, is your hand up?
It is not.
Okay,
Or at least
perfect.
It's not. Yeah, no, it's not.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for the time on a Monday afternoon. Great to see you all. I'll get this email circulated as soon as I can.
Thank you.
Thanks, all.